The town of Perdition was quiet the way a rattlesnake gets quiet right before it strikes. Dust hung in the air like a lazy ghost, and the sun beat down like a hammer on the backs of those who hadn't already found shade. Most folks kept their heads low, boots scuffing along the cracked main street, hoping to avoid trouble. That's when he rode in. The stranger sat tall in the saddle, his duster coat fluttering just enough to show the worn handle of the revolver at his hip. His horse was lean, ribs showing, but it moved with a kind of pride, like it didn't know it was starving. The man's hat was pulled low over his eyes. You couldn't see much of his face, just a thick jaw covered in stubble and lips pressed into a tight line. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. He just passed through the center of town like a shadow, drawing eyes and whispers from every corner. "Who's that?" someone muttered from a porch. "Some drifter," said another. "Ain't seen him before." They were right. Nobody knew him. And that was how Colt Avery liked it. The saloon doors creaked as Colt pushed them open. Inside, the air was heavy with cigar smoke and spilled whiskey. A tired piano played itself quiet in the corner, a drunk asleep on the keys. Laughter came from a back table where a few cowhands played cards and pretended they didn't notice the stranger walking in. Colt stepped up to the bar and set down a coin. "Water," he said. The barkeep raised a brow but didn't argue. He poured the water and slid it down. Colt caught it without looking. That's when he saw her. She was carrying a tray of drinks, skirts brushing the floor, hair pinned back like she was trying to hold the rest of herself together. She moved smooth even when the men whistled or called her names. Her face was strong, though her eyes had grown tired of being hurt. One cowboy slapped her behind as she passed. She didn't flinch, just kept walking. Colt watched her cross the room. Not because of her beauty, though she had plenty of that, hidden under the dirt and the shame. No, he watched because she reminded him of someone he'd once failed to protect. The saloon girl turned and caught him staring. For a heartbeat, her eyes locked with his. She looked away first. Colt took a sip of water. Later that night, Colt sat in the corner of the saloon, his back to the wall. He hadn't said another word, just watched. The saloon girl sat on the edge of the stage, massaging her ankle. She twisted it when one of the drunks pulled her too hard. Nobody offered to help, not the barkeep, not the madam upstairs, not the card players or the boys laughing near the piano. The town had decided what she was. Trash, they called her. Easy. Used. Not worth a kind word. Colt's jaw tightened. He knew that lie. He knew how people pointed at the wounded and called them weak, when most times they were the strongest ones alive. But still, he said nothing. He wasn't here to fight battles anymore. Not after the last one left blood on his hands and graves behind him. No, he'd come to Perdition because it was far from anywhere that mattered, a place where a man could vanish. But even out here, ghosts followed, and sometimes they looked like saloon girls with whiskey-colored eyes. The drunk cowboy from earlier stumbled back into the bar, spitting and shouting. "Where's that girl?" he barked. "Owes me a dance." The saloon girl stiffened. He grabbed her arm. She tried to pull away. Colt rose from his chair, slow and steady like a storm building out on the plain. "Let her go," he said. The room went still. The cowboy turned, saw the man in the coat. "What's it to you, stranger?" Colt didn't answer. He just looked at the man, hard, like a nail into wood. The cowboy's hand twitched near his belt. Colt didn't blink. After a long second, the drunk let go. "Whatever," he mumbled. "It ain't worth it." He staggered out. The girl looked at Colt. "Thanks," she said, voice low. Colt nodded once, then sat back down like it hadn't happened. He stayed until the saloon closed, then he vanished into the night, just as quiet as he'd come. The next morning, Perdition woke up slow. The sun crept over the hills like it was scared to show its face. Chickens clucked behind crooked fences, and a few store owners swept their porches, chasing away yesterday's dust like it might not come back. Colt Avery sat outside the saloon on an old bench, one boot propped against a rail, chewing on a splinter of wood. He hadn't slept much, never did, not since the war, not since her. He watched the town come alive, such as it was. A boy with no shoes ran past chasing a dog. A woman yelled from a window for someone to fetch water. A preacher straightened the church sign with the hands that trembled. And then she appeared, Lila Mae. She stepped through the saloon swinging doors, carrying a bucket of wash water and a rag slung over one shoulder. Her skirts were plain today, dust-colored like everything else in Perdition. Her boots had holes in the toes, and her left stocking was torn. She didn't seem to care. She dropped to her knees near the steps and began scrubbing a blood stain from the wood, likely from the fight last night. Colt chewed slower, watching her. She worked without complaint. No one helped. No one said thanks. The madam peeked out once, muttered something, then slammed the door. Lila kept scrubbing. After a while, Colt stood and walked over. "You missed a spot," he said, his voice low. Lila looked up, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "Oh," she said, "it's you." Colt just stood there, arms crossed. She gave a soft, dry chuckle. "You talk like a man with too many memories." He raised a brow. "That's supposed to mean something?" Lila leaned back on her heels. "Means I've seen your kind before, the quiet ones. You don't talk much, but when you do, folks listen." Colt said nothing. The wind filled the silence between them. "You were kind to me last night," she added. "Ain't many men who do that for someone like me." "I don't believe in kicking the wounded," he said. Her eyes flicked up to meet his, brown and gold, like old whiskey left in the sun. There was hurt in him, but strength too, the kind that doesn't brag, the kind that comes from surviving what should have broke you. "Most folks think I'm trash," she said. Colt looked away, jaw tight. "Most folks are cowards." Lila blinked. That wasn't the answer she expected. She turned back to scrubbing. "Well, you best move along then. Being kind to me tends to earn trouble." "I'm not worried," Colt said. She snorted. "You ought to be." Later that day, Colt wandered into the general store, nodding once at the clerk, who didn't nod back. Perdition was the sort of town that judged a man by how well he fit into its silence. Colt didn't fit. Not yet. He bought a new canteen, some dried beans, and a tin of tobacco. As he stepped outside, he saw Lila again, now helping an old woman pick up spilled potatoes from a broken basket. The woman muttered thanks and shuffled off. Lila sat back against the water trough and sighed. Colt walked over. He offered her the tin of tobacco. She raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Thanks," he said. "For what?" "For reminding me folks like you still exist." She shook her head, but took the tin. "You got a name, stranger?" "Colt." "Colt what?" He didn't answer. She smirked. "Oh, Mr. Colt." "What? I'm Lila Mae." "I know." "Oh?" she teased. "Been asking about me?" He didn't smile, but his eyes flickered with the ghost of one. That evening, Colt returned to the saloon, not to drink, just to watch. Lila moved like a dancer in chains, graceful but worn down by a weight she never asked to carry. She smiled at the drunks, kept her chin up when they whispered filthy things. When one man grabbed her wrist too hard, she slipped free like a snake and kept going. Colt clenched his jaw. His hand hovered near the handle of his pistol, but she shot him a look, just a flick of the eyes, that said don't. So he didn't. He watched instead, each second burning like a brand. After the saloon emptied out and the piano man had gone home, Colt lingered at the bar while Lila wiped down the tables. "You ever think of leaving this place?" he asked. She paused. "Sometimes." "Why don't you?" She shrugged. "Where would I go? Out there, I'm just another mouth folks don't want to feed. At least here I know which devils I'm dealing with." Colt looked down at his hands. "I used to think the same," he said, "but devils don't stay put. You carry 'em even when you run." Lila leaned on her mop. "You got a lot of demons, don't you?" Colt nodded once. "Used to be worse." She gave him a long look. "Well, if you ever feel like talking to someone who already knows what hell looks like, I'm usually scrubbing blood out of the floorboards." Colt almost smiled. Then he tipped his hat and walked out into the dark. 3 days passed, and Colt didn't say much. He watched. That was his way. He sat on porches, leaned against hitching posts, or wandered the dirt edges of Perdition where grass turned brittle and snakes ruled the weeds. He didn't chase trouble, but he sure as hell didn't duck it either. The townfolk grew uneasy, not because he did anything wrong, but because he didn't bow his head. He didn't laugh when the sheriff made a joke. He didn't buy a beer just to fit in. He didn't call Lila names or pretend not to see her. That alone made him dangerous. On the fourth morning, Colt saw it happen. Same time as always. Sun barely up, dew still clinging to the troughs. Lila stepped out of the saloon carrying a new bruise on her cheekbone. The barkeep stood behind her, belt still half loose, chest puffed like a rooster. Colt's jaw locked. Lila walked past without a word, chin high, like she trained herself to swallow shame. The barkeep looked over and sneered. "Ain't your business, stranger." Colt didn't move, just stared at him like he was measuring the size of a coffin. The barkeep spat near Colt's boot. "You best keep walking," he said. "Don't matter how fast you were with that iron. Round here, folks mind their own." Colt said nothing, did nothing, but his eyes said, "Noted." Later, Lila sat behind the saloon, back to the wall, knees pulled up. Her apron was stained with whiskey and mud. Colt walked around the corner, slow, like always. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away, and then, "I ain't dead. That's something." He sat beside her. Neither spoke for a while. The only sound was wind sliding through dry grass and the distant creak of a broken windmill. "I'm used to it," she said finally. Colt didn't look at her. "You shouldn't have to be." She gave a tired smile. "Folks don't like it when you say that. There's an unspoken rule around here. A woman like me ain't worth the trouble." "That ain't a rule," Colt said. That's coward talk." Lila looked over. "You keep saying brave things. You planning on backing them up?" He shrugged. "When the time comes." That night the saloon buzzed louder than usual. The sheriff was inside, a red-faced man named Traylor with a gut full of beer and a head full of pride. He sat at the center table with 2 deputies and 5 empty bottles. Lila moved through the room, smile stitched on like patchwork. She served drinks, dodged hands, and wore silence like armor. Then the sheriff stood up and clinked his glass. "A toast," he shouted, "to Perdition, a town with no need for outsiders or whores with back talk." Laughter rose. Lila froze. Colt, sitting near the back wall, looked up from his water. The sheriff grinned, raised his glass toward Lila. "Ain't that right, sweetheart?" Lila stared straight ahead. Then, steady as a church bell, she picked up a full glass of bourbon and poured it out on the floor. Right at his feet, the room fell death quiet. The sheriff's face changed. "You got sand," he said, stepping closer. "I ought to teach you what happens when—" That's when Colt stood, not fast, not loud, just enough. The sheriff turned. "You again? What, you fixin' to be her knight?" Colt didn't answer. He stepped forward, eyes hard as old oak. The sheriff put a hand on his gun belt. The room held its breath. Colt stopped 4 feet away. "She ain't your problem no more." Traylor scoffed. "And you are?" "No," Colt said, "but I'll be your problem if you touch her again." The sheriff stared, and then he laughed. "You must be slow, son. This here's my town." Colt's hand dropped near his holster. He's slow as a man reaching for coffee, but the sheriff knew what it meant. He stepped back. "No call for guns," he muttered, waving his man down. "We're just having a little fun." Colt didn't move. Lila's hands trembled. She looked at Colt like he'd kicked open a door she didn't even know was locked. When the bar cleared out and chairs were turned on tables, Lila sat beside Colt in the quiet. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yeah," he replied. "I did." She studied him. "You're not what I thought. I ain't what I was either." "Who were you?" He stared into the dark. "Someone who waited too long to stand up." She nodded slow. "Well, you did tonight." And for the first time since she'd known him, Colt smiled, just a flicker like fire behind glass. Morning came like a slap. The sheriff didn't forget. Neither did the town. Colt stepped out of the livery stable, brushing straw off his coat. He'd taken to sleeping out back with the horses. Safer that way. Less talking, fewer eyes. Perdition wasn't the kind of place that liked change, and he'd brought a gust of it with him. Down the street, shopkeepers paused their sweeping. A man hammering a horseshoe went quiet as Colt passed. Even the preacher's bell rang softer, like it didn't want to wake trouble. Only Lila nodded when she saw him. He tipped his hat. By noon, word had spread. Colt Avery had stood down sheriff trailer in his own saloon over the saloon girl folks called broken. Men whispered about him in alleys. Women stared from behind curtains. Some called him foolish. Others called him brave. No one called him friend. Lila found Colt on the edge of town, down by the dry creek bed where tumbleweeds rolled like lost thoughts. "You sure know how to stir the hornet's nest," she said. Colt glanced up from where he sat on a rock, cleaning his pistol. "Didn't mean to stir it," he replied. "Just didn't feel like getting stung." Lila sat beside him, pulling her shawl tighter. Wind tugged at the ends of her hair. "Why'd you do it?" she asked. Colt didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "You remind me of someone." "Someone you loved?" He looked at her face, unreadable. "Someone I failed." Lila was quiet a long while. "Want to tell me about her?" "No." "Fair enough." They sat together a while, letting the wind do the talking. Colt finally spoke again. "Where are you from, Lila?" She sighed. "Nowhere worth remembering. My folks died in a fever outbreak. I was 13. After that, I worked kitchens, scrubbed floors, begged when I had to. One day, I stepped off a wagon in Perdition and never left." "Why not?" "Because leaving costs money," she said. "And hope." He nodded. "I used to think I'd find something better," she added, "but every road I took led me here." "You ever think about taking one more?" She looked at him sideways. "You offering to ride with me?" "I don't ride beside folks unless they're ready to move." She smiled. "Not a big one, but real." Back in town, trouble brewed. Sheriff Traylor paced his office, red-faced and boiling. "You see that smug bastard?" He snapped at his deputy. "Thinks he owns the place. Folk are talking, Sheriff, saying he's got grit." Traylor slammed his fist on the desk. "He's got a death wish. You want us to run him out?" "No," Traylor said, his voice lowering. "We'll wait. Let him feel safe. Then when his guard's down, we remind him who owns Perdition." The deputy nodded. "And the girl?" Traylor grinned. "She'll learn who speaks last around here." That night, Colt sat on the hotel balcony watching the moon rise over the hills. Lila came by with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one. "I asked the cook real nice," she said. "Didn't even have to threaten him." Colt chuckled low. Kindness works better with a mean glint in the eye. They sipped in silence, and then Lila said, "And if you keep sticking up for me, you're going to get yourself buried in this town." Colt nodded. "I know." "Then why stay?" "Because if I walk away, they win, and I've lost enough already." She looked at him, something soft behind her whiskey-colored eyes. "You're not what I expected." "Most folks aren't," he replied. The wind shifted that night. A storm was building out past the ridge, lightning dancing behind the clouds like ghosts at war. Lila leaned against the balcony rail. "I always thought I'd die in this town," she said. "You still might," Colt answered, "but not alone." She didn't look at him. Just reached over and touched his hand, light as a feather, sure as a promise. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like something someone had thrown away. And Colt, he didn't feel quite so haunted. Not tonight. The rain didn't come that night. It just hovered. Black clouds sat heavy over Perdition, growling like an old dog with a sore tooth. By morning, it was still dry, but the air was thick and mean. Colt felt it in his bones that storms didn't always bring water. Sometimes they brought blood, and down at the general store, a young boy came flying out the front door, hands scraped, eyes wide. Colt caught him before he hit the steps. "What's the rush, kid?" the boy panted. "They're beating a man behind the store." Said he was helping the saloon girl. Colt didn't ask questions. He just moved. The alley behind the store smelled like rot and sour beer. Two of Trailer's deputies had a man on the ground. One held him by the collar. The other slammed boots into his ribs. Blood painted the dirt dark. Colt didn't yell, didn't warn. He just walked in. The first deputy turned. "This ain't your..." Crack. Colt's fist landed clean. The man dropped like a sack of oats. The other deputy reached for his gun. Too slow. Colt kicked it clean out of his hand, then grabbed his coat and slammed him against the wall. "You like beating on folks smaller than you?" Colt growled. The deputy spat blood and didn't answer. Colt let him slide down the wall, then turned to the man on the ground, a rail-thin farmhand named Willis. "You all right?" Colt asked. Willis nodded slow, one eye already swelling shut. "Heard the sheriff told folks not to feed Lila. I brought her bread last night." Colt helped him up. "That's a good way to get hurt in Perdition." Still felt right. Colt liked that answer. An hour later, Colt found Lila sweeping the saloon porch. "You ever get tired of trying to survive?" he asked. She paused. "Every day." He told her about Willis. She froze, then lowered her broom. "I didn't ask him to," she whispered. "You didn't have to." They sat on the edge of the porch together. Colt watched the street. Lila watched the sky. "Why do they hate me so much?" she asked. Colt shrugged. "Because you won't stay broken." Inside the saloon, Trailer watched them through the blinds. He poured a drink, hand trembling. "He's making you look weak," one of his men said. Trailer turned slow. "Then it's time we remind him I ain't." He downed the whiskey in one swallow. "Gather the boys. Tonight, we send a message." That evening, Perdition felt too quiet. The wind had died. Even the dogs were silent. Colt checked his pistols twice, loaded them slow, polished the barrels like church silver. Then he knocked on Lila's door upstairs. When she opened it, he handed her a knife. "What's this for?" "In case I ain't fast enough." She didn't smile. She just nodded, slow, like someone accepting a truth they never asked for. Night fell. At midnight, the door to the saloon burst open. 5 men, guns out. Trailer behind them, grinning like a wolf. Colt stood up from his table in the back. Lila ducked behind the bar. "Evening, Sheriff," Colt said calm. "You've caused a lot of trouble, son." "I'm not your son." "You're right," Trailer sneered. Nah, my boys are smarter." Guns cocked, and Colt didn't move. "You really want to die for a whore?" Trailer asked. Colt's face turned to stone. "She's worth more than this whole damn town." The room exploded. Gunfire ripped through the walls. Colt dove behind a table, rolled, fired once, hit the first man dead center. Another stepped up. Colt dropped him with 2 quick shots. A bullet grazed his shoulder. He grunted but stayed up, and Trailer yelled, "Kill him!" Colt slid across the bar, grabbed Lila's hand, pulled her toward the back door. Outside, the rain finally came, hard and angry. Behind the saloon, Colt turned and fired again, dropped the third man. The others hesitated. One ran, and Trailer cursed and ducked behind a water trough. Colt could have chased him, but Lila was shaking, bleeding from a cut on her leg. He put his arm around her. "We're not safe here," he said. "I figured that out." They ran into the storm. 2 shadows in the dark, hearts pounding, soaked to the bone, but still breathing. In the hills outside town, they took shelter in an old trapper's hut. Colt built a fire with shaking hands. Lila leaned against the wall, silent. Finally, she spoke. "Are you always running?" "No," Colt said. "Sometimes I stand." She looked at him through wet hair. "Why me?" He didn't answer for a long time, and then, "Because someone should have stood up a long time ago, and if not me, then who?" She blinked hard. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the fire cracked. And for the first time since Perdition branded her as nothing, Lila felt like someone. Morning light pushed through the cracks in the trapper's hut like golden fingers, but it didn't bring peace. Colt sat by the fire, eyes on the door, his shoulder bandaged and aching. Lila still slept, curled up on a pile of old furs. face soft for the first time in days. He listened to the wind. There were no birds, no hooves, but quiet like this in Perdition meant trouble was picking its boots real careful. When Lila woke, she sat up slow. "Is it over?" she asked. Colt shook his head. Just paused. She pulled the blanket tighter. Hey, then what now?" "We ride." They packed quick. Saddlebag of dry biscuits, a half-empty canteen, and Colt's spare revolver. He gave it to her. She hesitated. "You trust me with this?" "I'd trust you more than I trust anyone else," he said. She looked down at the gun like it was a new kind of future, then nodded. The trail out of Perdition twisted through the hills like a snake with secrets. Colt led the way on his black gelding, Lila right behind him on a stubborn little paint mare he'd found grazing near the hut. They didn't talk much. No words left that hadn't already been bled or whispered, just the creak of saddles and the groan of the wind, and the memory of gunfire still ringing in their bones. By midday they hit Dry Jaw Ridge. From up top they could see Perdition behind them, small and mean in the dust, a town that punished hope and buried kindness. Lila stopped her horse. "You think they'll come for us?" Colt didn't answer right away. "They'll try." She looked over her shoulder. "What if we just kept riding?" "Found someplace new?" "You can run from a town," he said, "but not from what it put inside you." She swallowed. "You ever get tired of running from ghosts?" He looked her dead in the eye. "I ain't running. I'm chasing 'em down." They rode till sundown, making camp in a rocky hollow, lit by firelight and dying sky. Colt cooked beans over a small flame while Lila washed the dust from her face with cold water from a spring. "You really think we can start over?" she asked. "I don't think we got much choice," he replied. "Only way forward's forward." She sat close to the fire. "I used to dream about leaving, but now that we have, I don't know what comes next." He handed her the pot of beans. "Next comes you deciding who you want to be." She looked at him long and hard. "I think I want to be free." Colt smiled, small and tired. "That's a good start." Far off, a wolf howled. Colt tossed another log on the fire. Lila asked, "What happens if Trailer finds us?" Colt didn't flinch. "Then I stop running, and I finish what I started." She stared into the flames, face glowing orange. "I used to think I needed saving, but maybe I just needed a partner." He raised his tin cup. "To partners, then." She clinked hers against his. "To never going back." They lay down that night under the stars, side by side, heads resting on rolled coats. Lila whispered, "Do you think folks like us ever find peace?" Colt's voice was low and slow. "Not sure. But I reckon we fight like hell trying." And with that, the night held them quiet. Two broken souls on the trail to nowhere, and maybe, just maybe, somewhere worth reaching. 3 days had passed since they left Perdition behind, and each mile stretched farther from the pain, but closer to something Colt didn't dare name yet. They rode through dried gulches, past broken windmills, and under skies that kept their own secrets. No sign of Trailer. No sign of peace, either. But there was laughter now. Little bits of it coming from Lila when her horse bucked sideways at a jackrabbit, or when Colt tried to cook eggs with no skillet and burned them black as tar. He liked that sound, maybe too much. They found a quiet town called Gray Bank, tucked in the crook of the hills. No sheriff, no saloon, just a feed store or chapel, and folks that nodded polite but didn't pry. Colt bought oats for the horses and 2 pairs of clean shirts. Lila bought a tin of sweet peach tobacco and a comb. They looked like travelers. Nobody guessed what they really were, fugitives from a town that had bled them dry. In the chapel, the preacher was sweeping when Colt walked in. He was a wiry old man with bent shoulders and eyes that saw straight through pride. "You lost?" the preacher asked. "No," Colt said. "I'm trying not to be." The preacher leaned on his broom. "Well, son, that's the right place to start." Colt took off his hat. "How much for a wedding?" The preacher squinted. That depend on whether the bride's willing. She don't know yet, Colt said. Then maybe you best figure that out first. That night, Colt sat on the porch of the little shack they'd rented. He watched Lila brush her hair in the lantern glow. Ever think about getting married? He asked. She paused, comb mid-stroke. Once, she said, a long time ago. What happened? He changed his mind. Colt cleared his throat. Well, I ain't changing mine. She turned. You asking me something, Colt? He stood up, fidgeted, looked anywhere but at her. I know I ain't much good with words, and I ain't got money or land or even a name folks respect, but I got hands that'll work, a heart that's yours if you want it, and a gun that'll stay loaded if trouble comes calling. He pulled out a simple silver ring, one he'd carved himself from a spoon back in Perdition. I reckon that's all I got to offer, but it's honest. She stared at it like it was made of diamonds. Then, slowly, she took it, slipped it on. It's heavy, she whispered. Yeah, Colt said. Truth always is. The preacher married them the next morning under a tree full of redbirds. No guests, no music, just wine through the grass and sunlight on her dress. Colt said his vows like a man signing a pact. Lila said hers like a woman finally unshackled. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," they both hesitated, not out of fear, but out of awe. Then Colt leaned in, and for once he wasn't the quiet one. Later that day, they sat by the river, boots off, feet in the water. Feels strange, Lila said. Why does? Not being hated. He leaned back on his elbows. Give it time. Someone will come along. She laughed. For real this time. The kind that cracks a dam wide open. Colt closed his eyes, sun on his face, and thought, maybe this was what peace felt like. Just two worn-out hearts trying to beat steady beside each other. But in the hills behind them, 3 riders were already cutting a trail toward Graybank. Trailer rode in the middle, eyes cold, guns loaded, and vengeance in his saddlebag. The sun sank slow behind Graybank's hills, painting the sky in bruised purples and angry reds. Colt and Lila were fixing supper when the sound hit them, distant hooves pounding like thunder on dry earth. They froze. Outside, the wind carried a cold warning. 3 riders, fast and unforgiving. Colt stepped to the porch, eyes narrowing. Who's riding so late? Lila asked, her voice tight. Colt didn't answer right away. Trouble, he said, and the horses stopped at the edge of town. The riders dismounted like ghosts slipping from the shadows. Trailer led the pack. His face was harder than the worn leather of his boots. No more running, Colt. Colt stepped forward, hand resting on his gun belt. Trailer, he said low, I'm done running. Behind Trailer, his 2 deputies spread out, eyes scanning the town like vultures. Lila stepped beside Colt. You won't lay another finger on us, she said steady. Trailer laughed, cruel and sharp. This ain't just about you, girl. It's about reminding everyone what happens to those who defy perdition. Colt reached into his pocket, pulled out the simple silver ring. Here's your reminder, Trailer. The wind caught the ring, flickering like a flame. Try me, Colt said. First shot cracked like a whip. Gunfire tore through the quiet town. Lila dove behind the well. Colt fired back steady and sure. The deputies moved in, but Colt was faster. One fell, clutching his side. The other backed away, eyes wide. Trailer charged, gun blazing. Colt met him in the middle of the street. Bullets flew, dust rose, metal sang its deadly song. Finally, Colt's bullet found its mark, and Trailer's eyes widened, and he collapsed in the dirt. The town held its breath. Lila came out from cover. She ran to Colt's side, and they stood together, victorious but shaken. The dawn broke soft and slow. Graybank was quiet again, but Colt and Lila knew the fight wasn't over. It had just changed. The fight had ended, but the weight lingered heavy in the air. Colt and Lila sat on the porch of their small cabin, the dawn light soft on their faces, but the shadows inside them long. Lila traced circles on the rough wood. Do you think it'll ever be quiet, she asked. Colt took her hand, rough fingers warm against her skin. Quiet like this? Not likely. but may be quiet inside, and that's worth fighting for." She looked up, hope flickering in her tired eyes. Days passed slow. Colt worked the land, fixing fences, tending horses. Lila helped at the feed store, keeping their new life steady. Neighbors nodded, smiles a little softer now. Trust was growing. One evening, Colt found Lila staring at the ring on her finger. "It still feels heavy," she said. Colt laughed low. "That's 'cause it's real. I promise, not a toy." She squeezed his hand. "I promise, too." But the past didn't stay buried. A rider came one afternoon, breathless, eyes wide with fear. "Trailer's men, they're gathering, planning to take Perdition back by force." Colt's jaw tightened. Lila stood beside him, steady as ever. "We'll face it," Colt said. "Together." That night they sat by the fire, planning, waiting. The quiet was different now, full of purpose, not fear. Colt looked at Lila and knew this life, this fight, was theirs to live. The wind was sharp as a knife when Colt and Lila rode back toward Perdition. The town looked smaller now, worn down by time and trouble, but it was still their past, their fight, their blood spilled in the dust. Behind them, a small group of townsfolk gathered, men and women tired of fear, ready to stand. Colt adjusted his hat. "This ain't just about us," he said. "It's about everyone who's been pushed down too long." Lila nodded, eyes fierce. "We fight not just for ourselves, but for what could be." They rode into Perdition's main street. Trailer's gang was waiting, faces twisted with anger. The standoff was silent, but deadly. The first shot rang out. Gunfire erupted like a thunderstorm. Colt and Lila fought side by side. The townsfolk joined in, wielding whatever they could. Pitchforks, shotguns, fists. The battle was brutal. Dust and blood mixed in the midday sun, but the courage of the few stood against the cruelty of the many. When the dust settled, Trailer lay defeated. The town was bruised but free. Colt and Lila looked at each other, knowing the fight had changed them forever. Perdition was quiet for the first time in years. Colt and Lila stood near the saloon's broken doors, watching as neighbors, once strangers, offered hands and smiles. Lila breathed deep, feeling the weight of the battle fade just a little. "I didn't think we'd make it," she said softly. Colt shook his head. "We made it because we weren't alone." She looked at him, eyes shining with something new. "Maybe this town can change." The preacher approached, placing a hand on Colt's shoulder. "You did good here," he said. Colt tipped his hat. "We did what had to be done." That night, Colt and Lila sat by the fire outside their cabin. The quiet was different now, not empty, but full of promise. Lila leaned her head on Colt's shoulder. "Think there's hope for folks like us?" He smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "Hope's the only thing worth fighting for." Above them, stars flickered like tiny promises. The past was behind, the future waiting, wide open and free. Air smelled fresh, and the dirt roads were soft with recent rain. Colt and Lila stood at the edge of town, watching children run and play without fear. The saloon sign swung gently, repaired and shining. Lila smiled, her hand resting on Colt's arm. "We fought hard for this." Colt nodded. But it wasn't just us. It was the whole town standing up. She looked at the simple silver ring on her finger, warm in the sunlight. "It doesn't feel heavy anymore." They walked through the streets, greeted by neighbors who once hid behind closed doors. Old grudges melted like snow in the sun. New friendships were built on shared struggles and hope. That evening under the stars, Colt and Lila sat on their porch. He took her hand, voice quiet but steady. "We got a long row ahead." She squeezed his hand. "But together, we'll ride it all the way." The wind whispered through the trees like a soft promise. Two hearts once broken now beat steady as one. The quiet bullet had found its mark. It's a life worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales from the Old West, be sure to like this video and subscribe to SaddleHorn Stories. We got plenty more legends, heartaches, and cowboy wisdom riding your way every week. Don't miss out. Hit that bell so you never miss a ride. Thanks for riding with us.